he's not as impressed with agile development as he used to be. And this is a problem that happens commonly in agile development. And it happens very commonly. And it happens because of the oldest reasons, because of the reasons that people were trying to talk about in the 1970s and 80s, and the things that we sadly know are true about software development. Well, first off, I want to talk about a term that's commonly used in software development called iterate, and I'm surprised that people don't always know what that means, and certainly Roger didn't. Most people set out to build software development, or they set out to do Roger's strategy and say, I think I know what I want here, and we'll build it incrementally, or one bit at a time. So increment by increment, they add a piece, and add another piece, and add another piece. But this is incrementing, or it's incremental development. It's not iterating. It does call for a fairly well-formed idea, and it does call that we don't change our mind very much. It means that Roger needed to get it right, and he didn't. I want to talk about another person who doesn't have a theme song. I need to come up with one for him. This is Fred. Does anybody know who Fred Brooks is? Same guy who read the Royce paper.
Mythical Man Book.
Say that again?
Mythical. He's the author of the Mythical Man Book. He's the OS 360 project in the 60s. That's
right. So he's been writing software since the 60s. Wow, what can he know? He wrote a book called The Mythical Man Month, which was titled that because there was a paper called The Mythical Man Month. He also wrote a paper called No Silver Bullet. And in that No Silver Bullet paper, which is one of the first ones that accurately described iteration, or not one of the first ones, there probably are more. One of the first ones I've read in my relatively short life. But it did a good job of describing iteration. But Fred actually in that paper boiled software development down into two kinds of complexity. What he referred to as essential complexity and accidental complexity. Accidental complexity came in the programming languages that we used, the processes that we followed, the way we built software and delivered it and deployed it and all those kinds of things. And he saw that a lot of people were focusing attention on those things as if it would help. But he referred to essential complexity as the difficulty in the system. How hard, let me back up and rephrase that. The essential complexity is how difficult it is to understand the business domain and what really is valuable. The essential complexity is how difficult it is to actually understand what would be valuable and deliver it. And from his paper, he referred to that essential complexity as the werewolf. And we can't kill that werewolf until we start focusing on it, and we will get no orders of magnitude of improvement in software development because we're not focusing on essential complexity. And Fred said that the hardest single part of building a software system is deciding precisely what to build. And that's the werewolf rearing its ugly head. And that's the werewolf that we usually find in software development because we're not building a building here. We're trying to build something that people hope will generate value, and it's not something we've ever built before. It's not like the next house in this long row of houses in this subdivision. This is something different, and every piece of software is different. So Fred described a process of iteration, where we start with an idea, and we might start with a first iteration of something that we definitely couldn't ship, but we need to build a little bit of something and evaluate it to understand if it's right or not. And then in a second iteration, we might add more, change some things, make it a bit better, adjust some things. And in the third iteration, we might finally get to a point where we feel like this is really it. This is something we want. And if we choose an iterative strategy, it allows us to move from a vague idea to a realization. We build a little bit at a time, but that little bit we're building is to learn something. not to add another brick into the wall. If we're building a wall iteratively, we might tear it down after the first bit of the wall was built and say, that's not the wall I was looking for. We would change things. A friend of mine wrote this on the whiteboard and trying to remind people, it's not iteration if you do it only once. So for building software, expect to rebuild it, expect to tear it down, expect it to be wrong. And Fred did, and Royce did, and a lot of these people who have been doing it for a long time did expect it to be wrong. So why didn't Roger understand that? And I guess I might start to blame a little bit of the Agile community for that. I quickly pulled from the web this common model of Scrum. It looks a little bit like my hand-drawn model, but it's got an important difference to it. This model is referred to as the snowman model. Does anybody know why? It looks like a snowman, that's why. But at the very end, coming out of the front of your snowman, is this word potentially shippable product. And if something potentially shippable came out at the end, well then, it's got to be right. It's got to be shippable. Somebody's got to consume it. It can't be a sketch of a product. It's got to be the product we might potentially ship. That's not really an iterative strategy. If what came out the other end was a first stab at it, then this sort of this makes people very tense. It means that they've got to come up with or describe or build the requirements for something potentially shippable every sprint or every iteration. That's a sort of a scary thing. So Roger saw that model, and this is the process that he was practicing, and I can see why he might have made the mistake that he expected that backlog to be correct, and he expected something potentially shippable. He didn't expect to change it. He forgot about the werewolf thing, and certainly that model doesn't remind us. This model works very well if you do intend to iterate, but it involves some different strategies. It involves living with a bit of uncertainty. I like to remind people that there's not just that one cycle, that there's more cycles. I've changed the head of the snowman out to talk about the story. That's the little piece of user story is oftentimes the term used for a little piece of software that we intend to build. We package up some number of these stories into an iteration, or in Scrum terms, a sprint. But we wrap that iteration cycle with a larger cycle called a release. There are some number of iterations in a release. Every iteration doesn't have to result in shippable product. I never intended to do that. And I don't have to put that constraint on myself that everything needs to be shippable at the end of every iteration. And around that cycle of release is the idea that I've got a product here that will have some number of releases. And I might, in fact, learn from every release and change things as a result. And more, we're seeing a lot of strategies for changing releases. Or changing product that has already been released. Every one of these cycles goes through a process of planning what I'm going to build and evaluating what I built. But when I'm in this iteration cycle, my plans are different. I'm trying to understand the problem. I'm trying to reduce risk in shipping on time. I'm being very cautious that every story I put in doesn't just build more bricks in the wall. It helps me understand the problem I'm trying to solve. It helps me get closer to being sure that I've got the right thing. I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to squarely confront the werewolf. It's at that release time, when I plan the release initially, I plan to release some kind of value. I know what's valuable for the organization, so I plan on releasing that. And at the end, I evaluate whether I actually did get that value.